eccentric, out there, indulgent, difficult, pretentious. These are all the things I was thinking when I first heard the news about Andre 3000's new album. Andre 3000 is, of course, one half of the wildly popular Atlanta hip-hop duo Outkast. He was the more flamboyant half. Andre has been basically musically inactive, more or less, for the last 17 years. This is his first true album offering in 17 years. And initially my thought was, man, this is like a textbook move by like a difficult artist that is restless and needs to always be sort of doing things that leave their audience kind of scratching their head. A friend of mine texted me and said, have you heard Andre 3000's new flute album? I was like, no. But I'm not surprised that he would do something like that. And I thought, this is a move by someone who is kind of creatively lost. Now, just to give it some context, I had heard him say things like in an interview with Rick Rubin that had a really kind of somber tone to it, where he was like, I don't know if I even have anything to share or to say. Just seemed like someone whose flow had just dried up somehow. And it seemed like more than just a case of writer's block. It seemed like something had sort of dislodged his creativity. So I'm thinking, boy, this is really not quite a cry for help, but this kind of a move by an artist who is completely spinning around in their own perspective and has lost his perspective. I could not have been more wrong. And my prejudice in that direction, like that immediate knee-jerk conclusion, is a case in point for why this album is so powerful. This is the sound of an artist taking his life back. I'm Sabby RK, the Apostate Music Journalist, and this is Feedback Def. So New Blue Sun consists entirely of instrumental music where Andre plays flutes and also programmed woodwinds as well, along with two keyboardists, a guitar player, a percussion player. This is about as far a cry from the Dirty South hip-hop thing that Outkast made famous or helped make famous. It's so far removed from that universe. It's like all the way on the other side of the galaxy. And aside from how musically profound and emotionally affecting this album is, it really is a game changer on more than just the level of hip-hop artists doing something new, more than even the style that he's exploring in this music, which hews closer to people like Rahsaan Roland Kirk, or Pharoah Sanders, or late period John Coltrane. I mean, it's more in that realm than anything to do with hip-hop at all. Even though Andre isn't attempting to make what you would literally call jazz, this music certainly has that reaching for transcendence that runs through the work of all the people I just mentioned. But it's actually closer more to someone like John Hassel, more in that sort of new age / spirit, quote unquote, spiritual jazz realm. With a detour, I feel like, through some sort of etheric traces of progressive rock. Like there are moments on here that feel to me like, how there's those like YouTube videos where somebody slows down like a song like 3,000 times slower and they like stretch it out and it's like and that's like one note. There are moments on here that feel like that feel like if like somebody took a moment from like Relayer or Tales from Topographic Oceans, those two albums by Yes, and stretch them out. Maybe not, 6,000x, but stretch them out considerably and turn that into some like ghostly remnant of that sound. That's what he's sort of working over. That's the foundation. And I mean, this is really, really, really exciting. But I hadn't given this guy enough credit because, I mean, we haven't heard anything like this from him to think that this would be as deep of a musical experience as it is. He seems really eccentric and he's, playing his flute on his like rooftop or whatever, or outside the laundromat. There's a new interview on GQ's YouTube with Zach Baron where they talk at length, and he's at a laundromat that he actually washes his clothes at. And he practices while his clothes are like in the dryer. He goes out to the alley and plays like his bass flute. And all you keep hearing is, I don't know if I have anything to say. And you're just like, man, what happened to this dude, right? So you're not expecting, or I wasn't expecting, I didn't have a reason to expect, like, no, he's out on some amazing musical trip. This album is 87 minutes long. And it warrants its length. Like it's something that you sit with. Even one of these tracks on their own, they just take their time. And there's something that communicates so much peace at the heart of it. But it's not like the music just doesn't, it's not like the music just sits there, right? It's not like you're just like in a still pool of water that has no features. There's movement, there is progression, there's a sense of traveling, although it's more of a form of astral travel, but there is a sense of getting somewhere, or of something infusing your energy. So this new GQ interview with Zach Baron has a much more optimistic tone than the one with Rick Rubin, where Rick Rubin was like basically pleading with him, no, you're an artist, you still have something to express. Clearly this is different. I mean, he just released the record and they're talking about it, so he was able to come forward with something. But it's interesting because there are moments where Baron keeps trying to sort of pull him back into our expectations, right? Even though he's standing right in the face of a living, breathing human being who's like, I am a person who no longer exists on the plane of what you expect from me. There is more to me than what I have done. Baron it's like he can't imagine someone would ever have the wherewithal to do that. It's like he sees Andre encased in what we, the public, knew of him from his previous career. And I understand that to some degree, particularly if you love Outkast's work. When someone comes and does what it just feels like such a left turn, right? It's just like, whoa, where is this coming from? Why are you trying to evade or even undermine or destroy my memory of you? That's what it feels like from our point of view if we love an artist's work. But this album, part of the reason why I say it's such a game changer is because it's really a statement on how we need to start looking at people in the public eye differently. People can establish themselves for having accomplished something and then completely come up with new facets of themselves to share. So there's an example of this in the sports world. There's a former NBA player named Kwame Brown who was savaged in a really terrible way by the super popular sports commentator Stephen A. Smith, who would always say Kwame Brown's name in a really disrespectful way. He basically turned the name Kwame Brown into a punchline and would say it with such disdain. And then eventually, a couple years back, Kwame Brown suddenly popped up on YouTube and revealed himself to be a wise, sage person with like this really interesting perspective. Somebody who was living this amazing life and showed the world without even saying, well, I mean, he did kind of say things like this, but you just watch where this guy's coming from and how this guy lives. And that line from Jimmy Stewart's line from It's a Wonderful Life comes to mind. I mean, you just compare him to this sports commentator, and it's like This guy will be more rich than you'll ever know. This guy's life and the way he's lived, he will die a richer person than you will ever know, with all your popularity, with all your money, with all your fame, with all your ratings. And all Stephen A. Smith could do is snicker and try to make it seem like Kwame Brown was irrelevant because Stephen A. Smith's ratings are so high. And it just goes to show the fucking narrow-mindedness of people who would take someone in the public eye and be the ones to define what that person's story is and who we remember that person as forever. And when you threaten that, the storytellers, the ones who would confine you to a fucking punchline of history, which is the most malicious thing you could do, they don't know how to react because within their bubble, this is all they have. They live in a fucking snow globe where they project this idea that famous people, athletes, musicians, whatever, they live on this Olympus that none of us can ever exist in. And they will be the intermediaries between us and that world, that higher world, right? And you see some of this in the interview with Zach Baron. It's certainly not with the same malicious tone, with the same parasitic, pimp-like tone as Stephen A. Smith. But GQ magazine, their whole, like, the entire premise that magazine sells us on, like, that magazine does not exist without the idea that famous people are in this sort of magical realm and we're not. We're on the outside looking in. Andre 3000 is saying, I've been in that realm and I'm going to do what I need to do. And we need to be more conscientious of this because more and more of us now have platforms where we can now establish followings of our own, right? Like the division between famous people and people who are just like everyday people who happen to have a large following is getting like more and more and more blurred. We have not wanted to accept or even consider that when we put people in these positions where all of this energy from millions or many hundreds of thousands or whatever people, when our expectations are rushing at them so much and we're pulling on them on an energetic level, this creates a drain. It is inherently difficult. It's not healthy to exist like that. And I suspect the human being is not equipped to stand in the rush of all that charge. It would be like going and standing in the middle of a river barefooted that has so much force behind it that it will lift you up and push you out to sea. And so we wonder why these people lose their minds a little bit. I thought that's what was going on here, and it's not. It's the opposite. This album, which Andre describes to Zach Baron as he wanted it to be like breathing, like something so natural and easeful. We're hearing the act of someone grounding themselves away from all that. Yes, it might seem like a contrived, like, I'm going to resist what you want, so I'm going to do the exact total opposite. You wanted a cheeseburger, I'm going to serve you, 18 gallons of peanut butter instead, right? It seems like that. But when you hear him talk to Zach Baron, I mean, he just sounds so centered. Like, this is how I'm defining life. Like, I go to the fucking laundromat. I like to relate to people. I like to speak to an old lady at the laundromat who's Austrian and tells me that my music reminds me of what she grew up hearing. And for all the people out there who be like, oh, famous people, they get paid well. They get paid enough for it. Or, other idiotic things like, if you're in the public eye, then you should expect to be criticized. If you want to be an insect life form that keeps its vibration at that level and chooses to blind yourself and say fucked up idiotic shit like that and cling to those ideas so hard because you don't want to face the fact that we put a lot of pressure on people in the public eye, maybe you should not have been born a human being because you're not using your brain capacity and you're not using your empathic capabilities. So maybe you should be born an insect next time. Maybe you should be born again as a hive creature, a little bug. Maybe that's what karma has in store for you. Or maybe those people saying that are actually doing the most divine, highest thing, and it's on people like me to not judge them or else I might be reborn as an insect next time, which would be hilarious if that was the way things were. Like, oh no, maybe I've got it backwards. Maybe those people are doing something useful by saying things like that. And I'm going to come back as some kind of bug for thinking, oh, I'm above that way of thinking, I'm above all that. So that remains to be seen. But what I can say is that people in my line of work, namely music critics / journalists, tend to not be creative people. Or more precisely and more fair, tend not to be in touch with their own creativity, and that creates a projection. They project all these things onto famous artists because famous artists are the ones that are most visible to us and we all share. I brought up Stephen A. Smith because it's like critics want to draw parameters around artists and have us all understand artists through the lens of the parameters they've drawn. They want to draw a circle around this person and say, this person and their work represent X. Now you see it through through the fisheye tunnel that I've just laid out for you. And this is not to take shots at Zach Baron. I would have wanted to see him approach that interview a little bit differently, but it's a really, really insightful sit-down conversation. It's actually quite a beautiful conversation. Mostly, I would say, as a result of Andre, but it couldn't have happened without Baron either. And it's really wonderful to see this person re-inhabit what looks like an ordinary life, or at least reach back to that. As far as the music goes, again, this is an album that is going to a place, like it was very important to him to go to a place that felt unfamiliar, that felt like he was exploring. He is clearly being pulled by an inspiration. Even though he's been quiet these last 17 years, he hasn't been completely inactive. He's been creating. He tells Zach Baron that he wasn't especially happy with what he was making, but it's not like his creativity was completely dormant. And you can tell when you listen to this record. This is like whatever's been sitting there has been a deep well of creation, and it's just maybe taken a while to allow it to surface, or for whatever reason to get around to actually giving it form, to feeling like he was on the right track or clicking or whatever. I mean, who knows how many ideas this guy threw out that we would think, oh wow, that's really, really great, or at least worth hearing, right? So he wasn't inactive the whole time, but he tells Zach Baron that he wanted to feel like a baby at something. You can watch, I've linked the video. And that's clear, right? He wants to go to the edge or over the edge into the unknown and come back with something that's an expression of that. And I think this album accomplishes that quite beautifully. Now, would I like to see him reconnect with his past in a way that both of these modes and, probably others can all sort of interlock and coexist and feed off of each other? Yes, I would prefer that. But for now, this is an amazing place to start. This is an amazing, I wouldn't call it a reinvention, right? It's an assertion. This is always what I was. This is what I have been all along. This is my muse. I would love to see him somehow retrieve or like find again his ability to express himself in like a hip-hop way, in a way that fits hip-hop in light of everything else that he's explored ever since, right? You don't have to like give one thing up for the other. He doesn't ever have to rhyme again, but I feel like that was a part of you. Where did that go, right? It didn't completely just vaporize. It didn't completely transform into this other thing. It's more a matter of him not seeing them as separate himself. Now, what this music is separate from is the nihilistic, death-obsessed, let's glorify killing each other, let's just like completely attach to this cult of violence of young black men murdering one another, this gun preoccupation. I mean, there's been plenty of hip-hop that doesn't subscribe to that. Imagine some kid in the hood surrounded by all of that who hears this and gets pulled by spirit and compelled to something else as a result of this music, and where they go and the perspective they have by the feeling that this music infuses, and then they come back down to earth, and then maybe they go from this to Killer Mike or something, and they reach another realm Feed the spirit with this album, feed the mind with Killer Mike's new album. Imagine that combination. And if he doesn't want to rhyme himself, he could have other people come in and do maybe not features, but also collaborate with him in like a broader, more creative sense. Like, why couldn't he have like a Lando Chill or Open Mike Eagle or The Lasso work with him? Those are just 3 people off the top of my head. There's lots and lots of people. I would imagine that Robert Glasper and Questlove, people like that, are hearing this album like, get him in here. We want to work with him right away. I'm hoping that's what happens because, I was going to say that it would be great to see hip-hop re-enfold and reintegrate this kind of expression into itself, but it already has. Hip-hop at this point has covered so much ground. It can accommodate anything, any style. It's like infinite what you can merge with hip-hop. And I would hope that Andre listens to albums like Divine Styler or PM Dawn. Those are 2 from way back, right? If he just listened to the last couple albums by Shabazz Palaces, that would be a really great place for him to start. Because I feel like I wonder if his idea of hip-hop hasn't split off from where his creativity is now because he thinks he has a really constrained idea of what hip-hop is supposed to be, or of what people's expectations of him are based on what he did before, and maybe he feels the way he was expressing himself before was somehow limited. Because he's said in a number of interviews that he feels he has nothing left to say, right? He even said in this GQ interview that he doesn't even want to do vocal music. He doesn't even know what he would write. And that presumably means even if he was, or the implication there is even if he was singing. I would love to see other people out there instantly take what he's done with New Blue Sun and like start remixing it online, configuring it, like chopping it up and adding their touches to it and showing him, no, this can exist with hip hop. Because I don't like the idea that this music is somehow above rap music. If he were to collaborate with other people who have a more expanded view of what hip hop can be, right? Like if he brought all of the roots into his sphere, I don't think they would be like, oh man, this is too far afield. No, I feel like certain hip-hop artists would be incredibly excited that you could do this kind of thing within the purview of hip-hop's ever-expanding reach. He never has to come back to rhyming himself. That's if he doesn't want to do that, if he is so removed from that, then power to him. But I'm always suspicious when... And it's a little bit of a red flag whenever an artist is like, no, I'm just doing this entire different thing than where my creative expression was in the past. Because what your creative expression was must by nature be a part of what you're doing now, even if it's in a different form. It's not like that part of you just died. It's not like that aspect of your muse or your inspiration just all of a sudden dissolves into nothing. So I wonder, or I have to wonder, whether this isn't just yet another permutation of like a round circle of different expressions that this guy has in him, right? Like we don't know next time if he might not do something completely different than this. Because he is clearly a multifaceted artist, and there has always been this pull within him to follow the lead of an inspiration that takes him to this like mysterious place that is kind of unknown to him. And imagine some of the artists I mentioned reminding Andre, hip-hop does not have to be confined. You do have something to say, and you can say it in a hip-hop style. I mean, again, he never has to do this again, but I remember the first time I heard that song off of Atlians. I saw this on MTV when it first debuted in the 90s. Me and you, your mama and your cousin too. Oh my God. And I remember thinking, man, this is tripped. Like the phrasing Now, I understand they didn't like invent this, right? Like there's a regional thing, but the phrasing was it sounded alien to me. It sounded like yes, I know the name of the album is Atlians, but it was like, it was so freaky and bizarre. Knowing that he has that sense of rhythm, and that he's been able to express that in wordplay, in vocal phrasing, it's like, it'd be a shame if you never did that again. And by doing something so far afield from what he's known and celebrated for, it seems like he's withholding his greatest gift from us, right? At least from our point of view. But I mean, he's always been about exploration. He hinted at this years and years ago. I remember in the early 2000s, I saw an interview with him, it was probably MTV, where he talked about how blown away he was by the British electronic experimental, like way of like forward-thinking musician Square Pusher, right? Like that dude's stuff is like brain-twisting stuff. And he's like, I heard that and I want to work with him. So he always had this appetite to go beyond what he's familiar with. And this album does that for all of us. I mean, even if you're coming from being familiar with the people I mentioned, like John Hassel and other quote-unquote spiritual jazz artists, this is still going to throw a curveball at you. Because Andre is not versed in that realm. He's just letting himself free through that door and seeing what happens. And that is very, very admirable from a creative point of view for an artist to do that. I've known musicians where you're rolling along in a creative groove, everything's going smoothly, and it's like, I have this idea. I don't want to play any B notes. We need to like only play in this scale because it matches some idea that they just got in their head, and we're all of a sudden going to like take a complete 90-degree turn off the road we're on to pursue what feels like just a complete diversion. And when you're in situations like that, there's a certain type of artist that does this regularly. That like you have to kind of brace yourself for them. It's like a form of avoidance. Them suddenly throwing a monkey wrench into things because they're feeling it as inspiration. You're feeling it as just like, oh, you're derailing the cart. You're like throwing us off just because. And they're not even aware of it. This is not that. This album is not a symptom of that kind of perverse creative self-defeat. In fact, the first track, and I have to read this because I want to make sure I get this completely right. The first track is titled, I Swear I Wanted to Make a Rap Album, but This Is Literally the Way the Wind Blew Me This Time. Which again sounds like it came from the mind of someone who is prone to these sudden sort of creative mood swings, right? I would think again if that's the impression you have. And he says at one point, this is not a flute album, because Zach Baron calls it a flute album and everybody else is describing it that way as well, which sounds kind of like even crazy or what the fuck. But it's totally fair. That doesn't encompass everything that this music is. There's a lot more to it than that. And I have to say it's a gift to all of us. For Feedback Def, I'm Sabby Reyes Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, blurring in and out of view here. Over and out.